I think that reparations is absolutely necessary. Generations of folks will be able to, their life experience and their opportunity will be enhanced because of what happens now. Poor white folks probably have as much in common as black folks. If people keep talking to each other and you realize that you want the same thing that I do, and I realize that your life is really no different than mine, even though opportunity in the way things are is going to be greater for white folks. You change the conversation, you change the dialogue, you change the visual, but the impact is the same. Well, this is why we're still stuck. This is why we're still having conversations about inclusion in 2020. That shit was all supposed to be resolved at the very latest in the 19th century, after the Emancipation Proclamation that freed all the slaves.
If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, try talking with one of them in real life.
Welcome to Back in America, the podcast.
Hi, I'm Stan Berthelot, and this is Back in America. Today I'm speaking with someone who wants to be a voice for the voiceless, someone passionate about civil justice. I'm talking with Thomas Parker, or Tommy, as he likes to be called. Tommy is 67. He was hired as a janitor in 1979 by Princeton University. Since 1983, he works for the print and mail services of the university. In 2011, the university recognized your engagement with the Martin Luther King Day Journey Award for lifetime service for your role as an advocate and an advisor to co-workers and your dedication to community service. Indeed, you work hard both at the university and in the community where you lead many organizations to help the underprivileged. In the early 90s, you organized with the Labor Relations Director Fred Clarke the first Labor and Management Committee on campus to help with day-to-day processes and contract enforcement and mutual consideration for bargaining unit protection under the collective bargaining agreement. Today, you are the president of Princeton Service Employees International Union, Local 175. Tommy, thank you so much for accepting to share your story with Back in America.
Well, thank you, Stan, for inviting me to share this story. It's a great opportunity, and it's wonderful meeting you.
Allow me to ask you to take us back to your early days when you were a child. What is your first memory? Tell us where it was. Describe what you see around you. What do you hear? What smell can you recall?
Well, one that immediately comes to mind, I literally can remember John Kennedy's inauguration speech, which was a morning. I'm up home, breakfast is going on, and it was on
How old were you?
TV. I had to be 8.
8?
I had to be about 8 years old, yeah.
Who was home with you at the time?
My mother.
Yeah? What did she do?
My mother was actually a domestic. She did laundry for folks. She did catering for some of the local markets around town, as well as private engagement, private parties for various citizens in the community. And she also was a babysitter or the precursor to what are now daycare centers. She, there were any number of children that were raised in my household.
What was it like to be Tommy, 8-year-old, living in Princeton?
At that time, I can't imagine being anything else but fun. What comes to mind is, I always look backwards and I see the past as these Sunday school moments. It's always kind of bright, playing with my sister and brother and my many friends. It was a neighborhood that had a lot of kids, so it was pretty cool. In fact, it was a very diverse community even then, before we started using terms like diversity. Predominantly Black or African American and Italian at the time that I was growing up. Previously, it had been largely Black and Irish community.
So as we prepared this interview, you told me that you grew up in a family of activists. When did you realize that your family was different, more engaged maybe? What form did it take at the time?
A lot of it was around the dinner table. My aunt was a civil rights activist in the time of the Freedom Riders and early on. Her best friend, one of her best friends, was Coretta Scott King. At times would come by the house and she would have an assortment of folks with her. I asked my aunt, I said, well, who were the folks that used to come to the house with you occasionally sometimes? I said, you dealt with the Freedom Riders. She said, oh, you mean like Andy and them? I said, Andy? She said, yeah, Andy Young and all these fabled characters, I'm saying, wow.
The Freedom Riders that Tommy is talking about were civil rights activists who rode interstate buses into the segregated southern U.S. in 1961 and in the years after. They were challenging the non-enforcement of the Supreme Court decision, which ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional. The southern states had ignored the rulings, and the federal government did nothing to enforce them. The first Freedom Riders left Washington, D.C. on May 4th, 1961. So what was the first march you went to?
First march I actually attended was at Princeton High, as a matter of fact. There was some activities with civil rights marches and the war going on at the time, and student protests and all that. So that was kind of my first official march,
Was it big?
Yeah, it was big. I know some of the high school students left from Princeton High, university students, students in the area, and we marched over to IDA, the Institute of Defense Analysis, which was on campus. Real big strike, and it was at the time during the same period of time that the students at Kent State were shot.
Let me ask you, we all know that America was founded on the principle of liberty and justice for all. Right. This country has been a melting pot for immigrants. And yet, Black people, their story is a bit more complicated than that. What was your first experience of racial discrimination?
Well, again, I don't know that it was anything overt, but I was kind of sensitive enough and in tune enough to kind of realize that I was being treated differently. One of the first things that I kind of witnessed that was relative to that didn't directly involve me, but I was a witness to the fact that they had a sit-in on Nassau Street at one of the lunch counters. Oh my gosh, what was the name of the place? But it was simultaneous with the luncheon and counter sit-in that happened in North Carolina, in Greensboro, and so some of the older young folks sat in and demonstrated here because we couldn't sit at the counter, at least not in the same section or at the same time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Here in Princeton.
Yeah. Well, Princeton was a little more subtle, but it was a connected chain of events. Even as a child, I was the fact that you'd be followed around, walking around in a store or something. You could do like the other kids.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah. More than one occasion. I had one old guy came out and just let me have it at one of the stores uptown. Used to sell newspapers out front because he thought I was going to take the money that was in the tray. You used to just leave your change in a tray,
So in 1979, you got hired by Princeton University as a janitor. And did you quickly became interested in the labor movement?
The president at the time was a plumber. And we're talking, so he said, well, would you be interested in being a shop steward? We need some coverage out here. And, I didn't know a whole lot about unions, but I said, yeah, sure. Well, I'll give it a look, and began to study, the processes and what's involved and the history of the labor movement, and how the irony of it being kind of always being tied into the civil rights movement, but also having to kind of clean up their own act, immigration, not only racial immigration, female, integration into the process, largely white male.
So this country has had difficult relationship with the labor union, right? In the 20s, I believe the government came down on the Socialist Party. In the 50s, the government started taxing the labor movement. And in recent years, Trump took some steps against labor union, and he even criticized the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industry Organization. Why do you think this country has had such a tough time working with labor movement?
Well, basically, I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to very basic values and principles. The has versus the has-nots, greed, the fact that the labor movement has kind of ensured that people were treated fairly, working in safe conditions, paid a fair wage, all of which took money out of the pockets of the haves, the rich and the owners.
And how has, in your experience, been the relationship between your union and the university?
The group that I came from, which I was actually kind of surprised about, considering how labor and education and labor and major industry don't always mix. The university, I'd have to say, in all honesty, has had a pretty open-minded relationship with us. It hasn't been extremely obtrusive, in the sense that they and especially after the creation of this labor management coalition that we put together, it's been a good opportunity to come to mutual agreement. Kind of a lot of win-win type dialogue, and they've been receptive to that.
So take us through some of the achievement that you brought along at the university.
The greatest achievement was building a working labor relations process. One of the things that came about that, along with a fair wage and decent benefits package and that kind of relative mutual engagement in that process, the allowances with that, but also, for instance, a change in the pension program to make it a more equitable process, which we got everybody to the same place probably about 25 years ago now or more. The service group at one point used to have one pension plan, and the administration and the educators had another pension plan, and that was seen to be top heavy.
Right.
You can't do that,
Right.
So through any number of engagements and conversations, like I said, their willingness to receptiveness, they realized that you're right, and we're going to change this. So it kind of balanced out everybody's opportunity as it relates to Princeton plan. And
do you have any relationships with with the students?
Absolutely. The students have been a great asset, tremendous allies, in the labor process. They're
Give me some examples.
Very in tune. Again, if we go back to the strike moment, the students participated in the process. That their voice being, hey, these are the folks to clean our buildings and feed us, and they deserve a fair opportunity.
So your experience promoting your work as a labor union person at the university has been good. The university has played on your side pretty much. How about the membership of the union? I read that for young guys, for young people, unions were sometimes seen as a bit dusty, things from the past. And, do you find that you stay attractive for young folks?
Well, yeah. In fact, it's surprisingly enough, we're probably more attractive lately, and even as I began to participate, not because of me or anything like that, but that's what I meant. SEIU in general is pretty progressive. All right, so they kind of take on ideas of change. All right, and in fact have reached out and encouraged a lot of these young folks, the students, to participate so that they can stay relevant.
Right.
And stay in touch with what's happened. And it's been because of that kind of progressive thought and kind of keeping the social justice and consideration in the forefront and in mind. It also ties folks, and that never, it never really gets dusty. Folks will always try to come up with, can't we get away from the past? Well, one of my officers, this young lady, stated in a meeting, which was right on the money. You always talk to us about living in the past, or can't we get away from the past? How can we get away from the past when the past presents itself in the present? The way you are treating these employees and the way you're treating workers is very reminiscent, very much like the things that we have debated with you guys about or had agreement about from the past.
So let's talk about your engagement with the community now. You've been obviously extremely involved with the labor union at Princeton University, but I know that you've got so many hats in the community. What do you do?
Well, part of that has always been the kind of principle of giving back, making the best with what we got, so to speak, and not be beat down by any kind of circumstance. That's like you had used the phrase, like kind of a voice of the voiceless, and again, driven by those same principles. I know for me growing up, there was always somebody's father in the neighborhood that if he's going down to the park to play some ball, say, "Come on, son, you come and go with us," or the elders in the communities that made sure that we got culturally involved. Going out and soliciting funds to take us to plays and things like that. So our experience is going to be the same as anybody else. I think I owe that much to my community, to stand up and be a voice. The work I do with the Civil Rights Commission, still largely about racial issues, but there's so many other things that come into play. The protections for women's rights, the protections for our new neighbors and immigration, for access and opportunity. There's a lot of working poor here. It takes organizations or individual activists to keep that in the face of the world, so that they, people will be able to take advantage of, or at least know that there is opportunity available.
Everything we discussed here, and obviously, it comes from your own experience as a black person, has been tinted by the racial issue in this country. Today, as we move on to the election years,
Right.
We're talking about reparation for the black African American. What's your view on the reparation?
Well, I kind of have mixed feelings. I think it's a process that should happen. I think it's something that absolutely is still a relevant dialogue, but you're going to get mixed review about the process, because quite honestly, one of the statements that has come out from folks that have been asked, largely black folks, is that there's not enough that you can do that can pay for
and
what
my
that
question
experience has been.
Yeah, and I was wondering, has it got to be a financial reparation?
No, but that's where the dialogues have to continue. It doesn't necessarily have to be finance per se, but even if you use the principle that the whole idea of reparations was born out of, like the promise to the slaves, 40 acres and a mule, you know? Now, is that directly cash? Not necessarily, but in folks' mind, they see it as a money issue. Reparations can also be about kind of guided opportunity for education that some family couldn't afford to because of the circumstances that they have been made to live in, all right, or have been it has been guided to or dictated to, and so you end up in this kind of endless cycle of wage disparity, poverty. That we really spend very little time talking about how some would think without reparations, on the one hand, the African American population or community as a whole will never catch up, because you're already starting behind.
And what do you think?
I think there's truth in that. I think that reparations is absolutely necessary, but I think it has to be something that has to be, like I said, more thought, more dialogue to it, because it has to be sustaining. Generations of folks will be able to, their life experience and their opportunity will be enhanced because of what happens now.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate now, but some people, white people mostly, would say, look, I mean, this is stuff from the past. Let's move on. I'm not responsible for what happened. You guys didn't live through slavery. I mean, let's put it behind us and let's move forward. I'm not saying I agree with that, but what would you say to such a statement?
Well, a lot of it brings on, especially with some white folks, they automatically take on this shield of defensiveness, this guilt. Nobody's blaming you.
I think it's a very strong word.
Or trying to guilt anybody for what happened in the past. But what you have to be willing to look at is the circumstance of what happened in the past and where that is clearly reflected now. Like you take it, like for instance, some of the cities, some of the inner cities, all right, white flight, and how all the opportunities left when white folks left, and they have to kind of look at the whole consideration for reparations has nothing to do with you right now. It's more the greater impact of what the experience for black folks has been in this country never allows them to kind of be truly equal, to take advantage of the American dream, be clear about dialogues about race, and they're always, like I said, I have to smile sometimes in the number of conversations I've had like this, is learning how we communicate and talk to one another, but also learning how to hear. Right? If I can't take responsibility for how you assess and judge what you hear. It's more about where it was more about the promise. The mule being kind of symbolic with
it's a mean of production.
Economic success. All right, like the more mules I have, or the more horses that I can trade. Like I said, it's kind of a 17th and 18th, 18th and 19th century type philosophy, but something that would help me keep going. Like if you gave me some land to work and mules to work the land, economically, I'm successful, and I can grow that, right? And that opportunity never came about. So now you're talking about the trillions of dollars or even more. You can't even put a figure on it, really, that the slave labor did, right? Along with the disparity in kind of cultural development and how that impacts your success and how you live and what your opportunity means. All that was taken from. And so therefore it becomes scary because the first thing that folks even consider, even if they don't feel personally guilty, is it always goes back to a immediate cash deal, wealth, money. We have no opportunity for wealth, but the 40 acres and a mule concept was a form of wealth. I have land, and all that.
And how do you translate it to today's term?
Yeah, and exactly. Where would that go from then to now? And that's why you'll have some even amongst the black community that would say, I don't necessarily agree with reparations because there's not enough to pay for where we were and what we came through and where we are now.
And something that you said, which is striking, is understanding the black experience, which obviously as a white guy, we have a pretty tough time understanding.
Right.
Do you think that this country will ever live the dream of Martin Luther King?
I am the eternal optimist and always very hopeful that I think yes, because I think that we make moves in that direction as a society and as a people, but you have the powers that be that also see that, and in order for them to control the outcome and kind of keep things where they are, they will twist the conversations. They will pit the have-nots against one another by giving some opportunity and others not, or not dealing with issues like conscious or unconscious bias. These are the kind of things that need to happen. And put, like I said, Stanley, just a very basic principle of dealing with the truth. You have folks that are hurting and you can't not see that. Right, that's why I do it. Every 4 years, like clockwork almost. You'll have 2 weeks out of the campaign season where somebody will actually bring up the question of poverty and the working poor, and then that gets shuffled around in unemployment numbers and any other figures like that, and then the conversation stops. Poor white folks probably have as much in common as black folks, all right? And I really think that if people keep talking to each other, and you realize that you want the same thing that I do, and I realize that your life is really no different than mine. You change the conversation, you change the dialogue, you change the visual, but the impact is the same. Well, this is why we're still stuck. This is why we're still having conversations about inclusion in 2020. That shit was all supposed to be resolved at the very latest in the 19th century, after the Emancipation Proclamation and freed all the slaves. We made citizens win. Some years after that, with all the full rights and principles. But if you're going to be a realist, it hasn't completely played out. But I am hopeful that we will live Martin's dream. And to some degree, we really are. I think that in fact there was a period of time where I don't want to say we're satisfied, but lost consciousness because things were changing at a kind of rapid rate. I'd say in the 60s and 70s, we were hopeful, we were believers, all right. We were caught up in the love of things, and everybody was, and others just kind of sat back and waited. Let enough time go by. Let's look at make the language on cleaning up these things that are going to make us all equal. And when there were a number of things that went down in the books, right, and in the law and in legislation, we began to think that, oh wow, yeah, okay, things are
it's moving in the right direction.
Right direction, and so.
And what happened?
We ended a lot of the conversations. We didn't prepare the kids who are now asking us about the truth of all this. Like, well, this is not what we feel, or what we see. And again, to your question, it goes back to like, well, why are you guys stuck? Why are you still talking about this? Because things really haven't changed a whole lot. So I always tell folks, you don't give up. Just keep pushing forward. Call it naive or pie in the sky, but I believe in humanity. I think people, given the opportunity and given the preparedness, will change, are willing to change, want to change. Ultimately, like I said, at the end of the day, when you have conversations at a grassroots level with the very basic needs and concerns of folks, they're pretty much all in the same place. And when they're having those conversations, their mouths drop open in amazement with like, wow, that's exactly how I feel. What would make me think, just because this guy looks differently than me, that he would want anything less for his experience? But the only way to do that is to keep communicating and not just talking for the sake of talking to take an action. All the great changes in the history of the world have come about largely by the push from young people. Mm-hmm. They say, we're not putting up with this nonsense. This is not the world that we want. This is not even the world you guys told us it was supposed to be. And they will push back. The generation of millennials are in recent times, the most like the group of young folks that I was and you
the
were.
60s, yeah.
Yeah, they kind of came about. They're challenging things. They're creating these movements. They're very much in the know. They're very much politically considered. Absolutely. With great influence and impact. And I love it, And so
I think that's, what you said about this optimistic spirit of yours is a great way to end this conversation. But before we do that, I've got two more questions for you. What is it to be an American?
What it is to be an American, I think I would have to fall back on the principles and values that this was formed by. To be champions of freedom, to be champions of a democratic process, and not a democratic process in a political sense, but more in the sense of opportunity. Everybody matters. Everybody counts. Everybody has some say. Now, society can title that in any number of forms, but at the end of the day, that is what America is, the land of opportunity. All those principles actually matter. They motivate for centuries. They motivated the world. That's why folks want to come be here. It's another thing about America that is almost unique, not completely unique. I would say is that if we disagree with something about those that are ruling or those that are in charge, we can speak up. Mm-hmm. We don't have anything to worry about, or we shouldn't have anything to worry about you're going to be imprisoned or killed because you have an opinion that happens to be in opposition to what the ruling class says. The fact that you can go from poverty to fortune, given the opportunity. This is what America is. To be a janitor and yet to be leading so many organizations. Exactly. And that's the whole thing. And actually, that's a good observation and a good point. That was one of the things that I've said many times. on campus, but also in talking with young folks. You can't let anybody else define who you are or what your experience is. Like, no is not an option. If you have a dream, follow that dream. If there's an opportunity, go after it. Go after that. Titles don't limit that.
Is there any book or movie that you think everybody should read or watch?
One book that always stuck to me when I was in high school, I guess I was a senior in high school. Anyway, I read a book called Man-Child in the Promised Land by Claude Brown that was written in the 40s. All right, about this young black man's experience. I want to say he grew up in Harlem, but just some of the kind of social dynamics he went through. I'm saying, like, wow, this is still going on now. I can relate to this. And it was also in a period of time when some of the students at the high school, we had Black Students Association, or Black Student Union at the high school, and one of the things that we created in terms of our experiences, we wanted the reading, the literature to be expanded, to be more inclusive. Who says that a classic is a so-called classic, or were there other classics that you guys haven't looked at? And so one of the books that actually got on the list was this Man-Child in the Promised Land, which, like I said, was prize winning, was very well renowned. So, and then also another one that comes to mind was I Know Why a Caged Bird Sings, Maya Angelou. And just so some of the folks that during that era that we were able to pick up and read Perry Thomas's Mean Streets. Again, this was a Puerto Rican young man, but the similarity of experiences. I think he was in New York.
Okay, thank you so much. One last question, and for people listening to this podcast, they cannot see you, they don't know, but I'm wondering, is there any significance, any meaning with the hearing, the ring you've got on the, what is it, left side, right side, left side, here in front of me?
Well, that's actually a pretty good question. I first got my ear pierced, when I was probably about 19. But it was also that was one of the things that was more about the era that we were in. That was kind of the whole revolution and the rebels without a cause, so ear pierced then. So I've literally had my ear pierced for almost 50 years, during various periods of time when I would wear it or not wear it. And the left side, as I recall, was symbolic at the time with kind of the movement, and I don't mean movement like the Black experience or anything. It was just kind of, I don't know. The rebel trend. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even before my hair thinned out, I had dreads and stuff too.
Oh, you did?
Kind of tribal, that tribal thing. That's the word I was looking for, so.
Tommy, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experience with me.
Well, thank you, Stan. I hope, I always, quite honestly, always have a problem talking about me because I kind of I do things because it's in my heart to do them, not necessarily kind of looking for that pat on the back, but it becomes hard to kind of express that. But I am proud to be an advocate, civil rights and social consciousness and giving back. That's really what drives me, Stan, giving back to the community. I want folks to experience to be as hopeful and optimistic as mine has been, despite the fact that I know, what's going on and how the world is. It's not a naive concept at all. It's just, it's a motivating power,
Well, it came out very clearly. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
How was it?
I thought it was pretty good. I think it was a conversation as opposed to an interview, and that's always better. I was hoping my wife could come because she's someone who's done a lot of work with young folks in the community. She also has been my rock. It kind of helps keep me going.
That was Tommy Parker, an activist, a union president, a janitor, a mailman at the university here in Princeton. See you soon on Back in America. And if you like this podcast, make sure you share it with your friend and your family.